Buffy Sainte Marie, a beloved Indigenous icon in Canada and the US, has been exposed for falsely claiming Indigenous identity. This carries massive implications across Indigenous communities, across Canada and the United States. I'm going to be explaining the ramifications on Indigenous people from the recent discoveries about Buffy Sainte Marie's false bedazzling of her Indigenous identity. The investigation uncovered that she was not in fact adopted into a Caucasian family, but instead they are her actual birth parents. Wowza. This reveal was quite literally history being made, yet the consequences from it are far from positive. On one hand, we have a beloved Canadian Indigenous icon who has falsely claimed their indigeneity, and on the other hand, we have an entire community of Indigenous people in mourning and deeply affected due to the implications that this situation has brought forth. After watching the documentary, it was quite shocking for me personally, and I took some time to carefully gather my thoughts and feelings about it in order to be as helpful to those of you who are affected by this, and those of you who are incredible allies consistently seeking ways to support in an authentic way. So stay tuned to the end where I'll share exactly how you can help with this, because I promise you this is going to ignite a new wave of even more complexities. This will help you to take important actions relating to Indigenous people and what it actually means to say you are an Indigenous person. So what I'm going to share with you in this video is 5 reasons why the Buffy Sainte Marie Indigenous lineage investigation not only hurts Indigenous communities, but all people within North America in our collective healing journey resulting from colonization. Number 1, because of the historic pain and shame of Indigenous identity, which has made Indigenous people disadvantaged and have fundamentally, on a level of just basic human rights, Indigenous people have been viewed as less human than settlers. This struggle of Indigenous identity and the way that the overall Canadian society has viewed Indigenous people since settler colonialism, for all of the community members within Indigenous nations across Canada and across the United States that have looked up to Buffy Sainte Marie for her achievements in music and in the arts, the simplest way to put it is that it's heartbreaking. No one would ever pretend to be a Native person. When I was growing up, when my parents were growing up, it just wasn't a thing. Some people that were Indigenous pretended that they weren't because they wanted to avoid the shame and avoid the racist remarks, and it was shameful. It was something that you weren't proud of at all. Please let me know in the comments if this resonates with you. The struggles with identity when you are being raised in an Indigenous community, within an Indigenous family, on First Nation Reserve, or in Métis or Inuit communities, or if you're in a tribal community south of the border in the United States, there are challenges that prevent you from even dreaming of success, and even setting high goals for yourself is not necessarily a norm. I mean, nowadays it's becoming more acceptable and there's more supports in place for Indigenous people to achieve greater things for themselves. But previously that was not something that was accessible. When you have those icons and mentors that you can look up to, you know that the battle that they have fought to get to that level, to reach success, can have a lot more connection, admiration for them. So that is why the discovery of the false Indigenous identity can be so complicating and so heavy in the hearts of Indigenous communities across Turtle Island. Please let me know if this resonates with you. Let me know in the comments below. Now, moving on to number 2. False indigeneity is forcing more colonial guardrails to be put in place to verify, question, and control what Indigenous enough means for everyone. Indigenous identity is a very difficult journey to navigate as it is. So having to prove our indigeneity now more than ever, which was created by a colonial system, is almost like twisting the knife, making the efforts of reconciliation that much more complicating and more difficult. Now, the guardrails, restrictions, and membership enforcements were originally put in place like from the Indian Act, from colonization, in order to identify and segment and be able to control Indigenous people and who was a member, who was not, who had, less rights. And now, because of falsely claiming indigeneity, it is causing more people and more guardrails to have to be put in place. So even if people do have documentation to support their lineage, the actual system and the process to gather those documents in order to either have access to programs or to verify that someone is of Indigenous identity, it is complicating as it is. And having forced rules and restrictions put in place, it's almost making reconciliation more difficult. And the personal journey of each individual to reconnect to their indigeneity and to feel like it is enough to feel proud of who they are and to feel connected with who they are, which is what the whole point of reconciliation is, it is becoming more complex and more painful and more steps in the process for it to become achievable and legitimate for someone to be able to say, okay, I am Indigenous enough by these certain rules and requirements and restrictions. Number 3, the third way the Buffy Sainte Marie investigation will affect Indigenous communities and individuals is that it will raise more questions about people who are claiming their Indigenous identity but not having a clear understanding of their lineage due to being adopted. I know of so many people who are Indigenous and were adopted. Their birth parents or one of their birth parents were Indigenous, and the parents who raised them, their adopted parents, are not. And they follow the same story that Buffy Sainte Marie shared as her true story in this documentary. Now, I know of many individuals who have a very similar story, and they had a wonderful childhood, but now they're trying to reconnect with their indigeneity, and I can see this becoming a problem. This entire investigation, all of this information shared about Buffy Sainte Marie's ancestry investigation is going to raise more questions about people who don't have any idea or proof of their Indigenous identity because they were adopted and legitimately were adopted and they have that information and that is true. But just because of that story that Buffy Sainte Marie has shared throughout her life, that is going to create problems for people who have a similar story to the one that she made up. Let me know if you believe this to be true, what your thoughts are, if you think this prediction is somewhat accurate. I absolutely see it happening. I was talking to my friend about, no, I know this person who were adopted. They are Indigenous. You can tell just by looking at them, First Nations through and through. The feedback that I received from that was, well, look at Buffy Sainte Marie. Look at how native she looks, right? It's really complicating. And the trouble with this specific point of people being adopted is that alone, having that be your upbringing of knowing that you were adopted and having those questions in your mind as you're growing up, as you discover that, and the feeling, I personally was not adopted. I can't relate to what that must be like for an adopted child to know, or even as they're growing up and becoming an adult, I can't imagine what that would be like. I assume it must be complicating, and to be in a situation where you have to question that person if it is actually honest and they're being honest about their story and it's true, having to push and pry and doubt that they are being honest about it, absolutely see it happening, and it's a difficult one. I have a ton of compassion and empathy for those of you who have been adopted, and maybe this discovery of Buffy Sainte Marie is triggering and it's upsetting and maybe makes people see themselves in it in some way, shape, or form, and it is complicating. So I have empathy for you if that is your situation. Let me know what your thoughts are on this point of the Buffy Sainte Marie investigation being connected to other questioning and doubts about adopted Indigenous children. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Chimigwech. Number 4, the Buffy Sainte Marie investigation twists the knife for communities struggling with intergenerational family issues. Abuse has been inflicted upon Indigenous people, causing individual and collective trauma that's been passed down by not having the tools and resources to identify what's going on and heal from trauma. That's why there's extreme family issues, poor relationships, trust issues, you name it. These intergenerational family issues, not being able to trust each other, not to know right from wrong, good from bad because of the trauma that has been passed down, it affects people and their ability to succeed in anything that has to do with relationship building, and is even more impacted in our families and within our community. These kinds of damage and trauma affects people's ability to succeed. Having that support system that isn't as strong as it otherwise could be if you were in a healthy family dynamic and one that knows how to trust each other and how to live a healthy lifestyle. This is something that is unfortunately an issue in many Indigenous communities due to the impacts of colonization, residential school, racism, having abuse from settlers and other individuals within power who have inflicted pain on individuals and community members within Indigenous nations, has caused an inability to be able to cope with difficult situations, not be able to communicate with other members of your family and have healthy relationships that are necessary in order to succeed, in order to achieve your goals, to set goals, to have a healthy environment. So when you see someone who has been able to thrive and has had a support system that has allowed them to have a healthy path in their life and to be able to achieve successes because of not having intergenerational issues, it makes more sense why someone hasn't had to experience a lot of the trauma that has affected families in Indigenous communities, prevents people from having access to opportunities, access to a support system that is needed, being resilient in situations where you are striving to be successful in any area of life, in any industry, in any category. So the fifth and final way that the Buffy Sainte Marie investigation has us feeling kind of backtracked when it comes to truth and reconciliation is because Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action that have been put forth and are supposed to be kind of welcomed and prioritized for organizations and individuals and all of society across Canada, at least. Even in the United States, they have their own sort of efforts and initiatives towards truth and reconciliation. But the Buffy Sainte Marie investigation has us feeling kind of a few steps back when it comes to reconciliation, because truth must happen, of course, before reconciliation. When stories like this are brought to light that are completely false and the core of that story is a story of a mistruth or it's a lie, Truth and Reconciliation is an ongoing effort that involves both Indigenous community members and settler society. It's one that requires patience, commitment. Many people are striving for reconciliation. And when there are more lies that emerge in society, whether it comes from a government source or from an individual, it could feel like we're even further from what is true. Those are the 5 reasons why the Buffy Sainte Marie heritage lineage investigation hurts Indigenous communities. Also, many people within Canada and the United States in our collective healing journey resulting from colonization. So you might be wondering how you can help. How can you make a difference and help people and communities that are hurting as a result of this recent discovery? And it's not just Indigenous people that are hurting from this. She also claimed to be Canadian. So Canadians that looked up to her could also be feeling really hurt and betrayed, right? So some ways that you can help is, first, understand that if someone says that they are Indigenous, whether it's an individual or an organization, it might not mean what you think it means. Another way is, if you're working in an organization that's striving for reconciliation, don't be afraid to have these conversations surrounding newsworthy findings and how it might affect people in your life that are affected by this. Let me know what your thoughts are on this video and the 5 reasons that I shared, and how the Buffy Sainte Marie Indigenous Ancestry investigation has impacted Indigenous communities, and how I think it will further impact communities across Canada and the United States. I'd love to know your feedback. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you. Chimigwech and Guabmin.